or pick up a job, because BIM is a big boom in the market, and those who have the Revit capabilities, they have more intentions to get more better salary, all right, have a more job opportunity around the world, okay. So, and some of the countries also, they start to talking about prefabrications. So they move ahead on whatever that we are doing, design, analysis, construction, and so on. Most of it, they start to talk about moving the BIM to the prefabs, or even the modular construction and so on. So the next thing is people start to talk about cloud-based, all right? So if you guys heard about BIM 360, A360, some of the cloud-based that's available in the market, you know that internet connection is very important nowadays. So even just now I realized while waiting for the seminar to start, people start to browsing and start to asking for the Wi-Fi password, username and password and so on. So if you look at all this kind of industry challenge and also the trend, you know that the market is changing. The world is changing, the construction industry is changing as well. So basically, what we are looking at differently today is, if you're looking at the people, process, tools, and data, all these kind of four things actually is quietly connected to each other. So we need a process. We need a process for each of the construction projects. So BIM, we have identified BIM as the project. But how about the resources or the people? Do we have enough people to do the job? Do we have the draftman that knows Revit? Do we have the architects or the structural engineer know about Revit? So how about the owner? Do they know what is BIM? What they expect about BIM? So when people talk about BIM, people start to talk about data. Okay. So right now, if you look at some of the projects especially on the big projects, the owner start asking about the data. So they want to know what kind of data that you can give it to them for their facility management, for their construction management, and so on. So when we talk about all these kind of things, tools is one of the major important roles that's played. All right. So Revit is just one of the tools that's available in the market. For the BIM process. In fact, if you browse in the internet, you can see there's thousand types of BIM tools in the market and so on. So all this kind of thing is quite connected. All right. So just to look at the recap again, what the construction is changing. What I meant is construction is changing is now everyone is talking about connected teams. Okay. So if you guys are in the multinational company or the MNC company, you have all this kind of counterparts in Dubai, in UK, in Singapore, everywhere in the world. So like for example, the most common is we have in Malaysia, most of the architect firm or the consulting firm, they start to build up their BIM studio in Philippines because of the labor, because of the technical skills and so on. So you can see all these kind of things, we start to crossing all the borders and start to talking about connection about each other, all right? So when we talk about connection, everything is going to be go by digitals, okay? So even some of the construction in the States, also in some of the developed countries in ASEAN, they start to go for the digital construction. That means that they're not going to bring A3 drawings or A1 or A0 drawings to the sites anymore. They start going to bring iPad to the site to do to check on the QA/QC, to check on the safety, to do the checking on the drawings and so on, to do it for the installation and so on. So all this kind of thing is quite connected to each other. Okay, so if you're looking at all this kind of construction is changing, I just want to share with you what is happening in Singapore and Malaysia, just because I have more interaction with these two countries. Okay, Singapore is, everyone knows that they comes about BIM, or their mandate about BIM is quite late if you compare with other countries. Okay, so they started in 2009, but just because that the government have a lot of initiative, so their gain on the BIM adoption level is very high. So they aim, in 2014, it's already 65% of the adoption levels throughout the whole construction industry. And what they're targeting is by 2016 or 2017, they want to hit by 99%. Okay, so there's a lot of things, initiative that's being done by the government agency, especially from the BCA. In Singapore, they call it as a Building Construction Authority. So they are the parties or the agency that's quite involved into BIM, and they are the one who's supposed to draft the BIM guide, who manage the BIM adoptions and also initiative in Singapore. So until the last 2014, basically everyone in Singapore is talking about the BIM process, how they're going to carry the BIM data or the BIM model from pre-construction, from the design stage up to a construction stage. But what is quite interesting in Singapore is starting beginning this year in 2016, they start to talk about cloud-based collaborations. That means that they start to talk about they want to host all the data informations in the cloud. So that is one of the hot topics that is happening in Singapore right now. So they're talking about all this kind of digital construction, digital analysis, and so on. I will share to you more on details, what kind of tools or what kind of solution that the Singapore government is looking into. Okay, and the next thing is Malaysia. So despite any story about the Malaysia politics, okay, so Malaysia is being the BIM adoption or the BIM initiative have been chaired by the Public Works Department, or what we call is the JKR or PWD in Malaysia. So they introduced BIM to the market in 2007, okay? But unfortunately, if you look at the BIM adoption in Malaysia, it's very low at the moment. So if you're looking at the rates, it's only talking about 5 to 10% in the whole construction industry. But what we see recently, beginning last year to this year, you can see the adoption is have a significantly increasing in a year by year. Just because that we realize that in Malaysia, in the reality is in Malaysia, the BIM initiative is not driven by the government. It's driven by the user or by the owner itself. So the building owners or the developers start to ask about the BIM data or the BIM models from the consultants. So because of that, the whole market is start to talk about and start to discuss about the BIM adoption, the BIM implementations, the BIM process for certain projects for the owners and also for the developers. Even though for the government agency like the PWD, the Public Works Department, they also start to ask about the BIM models for certain their projects. So in Malaysia, we have quite numbers of projects is going to BIM. Some they are stopped at the construction stage, and some they even ask until the facility management level as well. All right. So basically, based on all these kind of feedbacks from the industry, like Singapore is asking for the cloud-based, Malaysia is all the developers and owners is asking about BIM. Vietnam, the BIM adoption is quite high recently. Philippines and Indonesia is quite high as well in terms of the BIM adoption. And everyone is start to talk about BIM, especially on the large and complex projects. So those who are on the Autodesk platform, especially the Revit, you will realize that one of the major issues is when you want to deal with the big projects or the mega projects. So when you have a big project, you have a tendency that you're going to face lagging issue, all right? Then you have to break all the models into separate parts and do it as a link or the work set. So we did a few enhancements in terms of that on the Revit 2017. If you look at it right now, for the Revit 2017, we are not using on the processor performance anymore. We start to move the software to use the graphic performance, all right? So I did do a quick video screenshot from the Autodesk website. Basically, from the left screen that you're looking at actually is the Revit 2016, and the right screen is the Revit 2017. So basically, you can see whenever you deal with a big project, now with the Revit 2017, you can start to move around the models, and the building is quite faster when you want to rotate, panning, zoom in, zoom out, and so on. All right. So the reason behind is Revit 2017 will not generate any component or any element that is not visible to that particular view. All right. So like for example, any interior doors, interior windows, or interior walls, and so on, they will not generate whenever you start to move your models. All right. So they will start to generate the skeleton on that. Okay. So before I continue, I just want to ask to the audience is, how many of you are start using Revit 2017? Any one of you? Okay, there are few over here. The rest are still on 2016, 15, 16. All right, so most of it are still on 2015, 2016, right? Is there anyone still using Revit 8.1 or 9.1? I hope no. Okay. The reason is because I started to learn Revit since Revit 8.1, and I see there's a lot of change on that one. Okay, so when we talk about complex projects, big projects, and so on, we realize that there's a certain limitations on Revit that's quite limit the users in terms of their designings, and also their performance, and also their working flow. So basically in Revit, we have another add-on what we call is the Dynamo. I'm not going to talk into details on Dynamo because we're going to have one expert on Dynamo that's going to talk about Dynamo and also another solutions with you guys at the second part of the presentations. So, but in general, Dynamo actually is a visual graphic, visual programming. That means that previously, if any programmer that's still starting to write any program on top of Revit, like the API, plugin, and so on, basically now you have the capability to learn about the visual programming and start to develop your own programs or the automation. In short, I call Dynamo is an automation tool. Whatever that you require to develop Revit manually, so you can automate that kind of process with Dynamo, okay? So later on at the second part, Angwin is going to show it to you how he's going to use Dynamo in some of his projects or in some of his proof of concept projects. Okay, so I'm going to touch a little bit on the Revit 2017. Basically, I'm not going to touch into all the kinds of features, but I'm going to show to you some of the features that might help in terms of your process, in terms of your modeling, and also the documentation as well. So I'm going to do a live presentation over here. I'm going to show it to you on the Revit 2017. Basically, if you look at the interface of Revit 2017, everything is going to be the same. All right. Okay. So I'm going to split it into 4 parts of the presentation. The first part, I'm going to show to you how the Revit is going to help you in terms of the, okay, let me see if I have it here. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to show it to you how the Revit 2017 is going to help you in terms of the drafting and also the documentations. Then I'm going to move into architecture part, structure, and also the M&E or the MEP. Basically, I'm not going to touch all kind of features, but I'm going to just touch a little bit in terms of the key features that might help you or you might be interested into. Okay, so when we start to talk about the documentation, one thing is quite important is when your architects or the engineers start to ask you to make some of the amendments. Like for example, let's say that I have a couple of doors over here, and the written wall lap for each door is quite different. Okay. So previously, if you want to do this kind of adjustment, let's say that, okay, I have about all is going to be 150 over here. Okay. So let's say that the architect or the engineer or even your boss start to saying that, hey, I want to make all this kind of 150 return wall lap to become 200 or 250. What you're going to do next is you're going to start to click one by one and start to change the dimension and so on, right? Okay, so that is quite normal. That one is quite normal when you start to talk about the dimensionings and so on. So even when I talk about this kind of the exam room, okay, so let's say that I'm going to have this kind of exam room, and I'm going to check the dimension of the exam room is 3000, okay. So, and the width and the depth is 3000 over 3005, the room size. Okay, so if I want to make this kind of changes automatically done immediately once I change the dimension, basically what we can do is we can start to use what we call is a global parameters, okay? So I'm going to delete all these kind of parameters. I'm going to show it to you from beginning, how I can create all these kind of global parameters. Okay, so previously parameter is only available in the family type, okay? So are you guys ever use create your own families and so on, right? So you will play around with the instant parameter, type parameter, shape parameters, all those kind of parameters. So in Revit 2017, we have one thing what we call is a global parameters. Global parameters is to help you. The method for the global parameters is almost the same. Let's say that I'm going to say that this is exam room width, okay? And I'm going to create another one called exam room depth, okay? So how we develop is almost the same how we create the parameter in the family, okay? So basically what I'm going to do is I can do all this kind of width, depth, height and so on. I can even pre-key in the dimensioning, okay, over here. And I can even create a formula as well. Let's say that I want it to be exam room every time the depth increase, the width is going to add by 50 or 100. Basically, I can do this kind of thing. All right. So what I'm going to do next is all this dimensioning, I can assign it to a parameter. Okay. So like for example, this one is the return wall lap. Okay. And I can start to assign this one as my exam room width, all right, and this one is the exam room depth. Okay, so I have a little bit conflict over here, so I just ignore it. All right, so we can create all these kind of global parameter, and when we start